No video tonight. I know you're disappointed. So what we're going to do is, how many of you are signed up to go to camp with us next week? Most in the room. Cool. If you're not, shame on you. No, I'm just kidding. We would love for you to go. We still have about, 8 spots or so available. So if you have like a friend or 2 or 3 or whatever, you want to go to camp, we would love for you to go to camp. We'll talk about that later. But so tonight, we're kind of, since we finished our series last week with the father-daughter type of deal with Rachel and her dad, Eric, we're talking about stress and what that kind of storm is in our life. Tonight I wanted to talk just briefly, because we're going to be done in about 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to move into a camp meeting. So if you're not going to camp with us, then you can leave if you want after that, or you can just hang out for a little. We won't open the gym yet. We will open it after that, after our camp meeting, so you can play and all of that stuff. But you'll kind of, if you want to stay, you'll just have to kind of sit through the meeting. It's not that long and boring, trust me. But it'll just be camp information given out. So tonight I wanted to just talk to you. Why do we do camp? Why is camp such an important part of youth ministry, or at least of our ministry that we do every year? We go to camp every year. And why do we, not about why we go to global camp or this camp or that camp. We've been to other camps in the past. I never did global camp until I came here. So my last church, I did camp at a different place every other year. So, I've done camp. This will be my 20th year of camp. So camp is just something that has been a big part of our ministry, and the ministry that I've been in. So why do we do camp? What's so important about camp? Is it anything that does the Bible talk about going away to camp? I don't think so. I mean, I looked and I tried to find, some place, some way where camp was mentioned. It's not even mentioned in Scripture. It's not that I'm aware of, anyways. Summer camp is not mentioned. So what is something we can talk about that would give us an indication or show us the importance of why we think, or why I think, maybe not you, but why I think camp is important? What is it? What's so important about this? So if you allow me, just a short message, okay, I promise. Just as I told Zach earlier, it's a short message, I promise. Zach asked me, will your message be long tonight? What is that? I'm like, my message always too long? Is that I think that's what he was asking. But anyways, no, it's not going to be long. It's going to be very short. So I promised him that. But we're going to look at one passage in particular. We'll look at a couple different ones, obviously, but we're going to look at one in particular. Again, this doesn't speak to camp at all, okay? But it gives us some indicators of why I think a ministry like summer camp is important for us. And not just because you're teenagers, because I get a lot out of camp every year too. I do. I mean, I've told you before, it's my favorite week of the year. The week before camp is not so much my favorite week, but the week of camp is my favorite week of the year. The week before camp is just stressful because, there are people signing up still, and we're going to sign people up tonight probably, hopefully, and some of you, that may be you. But, there's all this, 2 years ago, maybe last year too, 2 years ago, we signed up to the day of, like Monday morning. We were loading the bus, and I'm getting a text saying, hey, can we come to camp? And I said, yeah, come on. One of them, I never laid eyes on one of the persons that came to camp that day, and she spent the rest of the whole week with us. So it was a great. So we'll probably even add more towards the end of the camp, towards the end of the week. But so this week right here is always kind of stressful for me because I don't do details very well. You can ask Heather that. I'm not a detailed person. I'm more of a big picture guy. I don't really like the details, even though you got to be into some details. But so here's what Paul says in the book of Romans chapter 12. This is a very famous verse. Again, the word camp is not mentioned at all in this passage, but it's a very famous passage, Romans 12 verses 1 and 2, and we're going to look at and just a few things why camp can be important, or something like camp, retreat, anything like that, okay? Here's what he says. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers. Now, let me just pause and say, remember, when you see the word brothers or brethren or whatever translation you use, If you use the Message, it probably says, I appear to you, I don't know, hipsters. I don't know, whatever. The Message is kind of just, whatever. But brothers, he's talking to you. If you have a relationship with Christ, this is a message for you, okay? This is for you. It doesn't matter who you are. This is written for you, so you can take, this can be a promise to us. So I appeal to you, therefore, brothers. He's appealing. He's urging them. He's just laying it out. He's laying his heart out to them. By the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship, or spiritual act of worship. The NIV says a spiritual act of worship. So he's saying here, I'm pleading with you, your bodies are the temple of God. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice to God. Somebody's whistling at me. It was Aaron. Aaron likes to whistle at me through the day. So anyways, but then he says, verse 2, here's where we get into the crutch of what we're going to talk about tonight. Verse 2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect, his pleasing will. Now, you may think, okay, perfect. That doesn't say the word camp. You're exactly right. I already said to you about 3 times. It doesn't say the word camp there. But here's what I think this can mean for us as we prepare for camp, or it could be retreat, or anything that we do where we go away, okay, for a little while. Here's what I think it means. Number 1, if you see, he says, do not be conformed to this world, to the pattern of this world. Camp, or any ministry like camp is so important because it gets us away from the distractions of life. On your sheet, you'll get tonight, if you haven't already gotten that, for if you're going to camp, it'll say, don't bring, what not to bring. Don't bring cell phones. And you know what I say? Bring them. I don't care, because they don't work up there. And if you've been, you know, you have very little service whatsoever. So you bring them all you want, okay? I don't care, because they don't work. So here's the deal. Camp gets, and I know some of you are like, oh my gosh, I've signed up for camp and my cell phone won't work. I'm getting out, right? I don't want to go now. I want to stay at home, because if I don't have my cell phone, I will go into withdrawal, okay? I get that. I know you find this awkward or hard to believe, but I'm a little attached to my cell phone too. Maybe not as much as you, but probably, okay? I'm right there with you. Here's the deal. We all need those moments when we are just unplug from society somewhat. Now, we're not going into a remote village, okay? It may feel like that at times when we're up on that mountain and there's you're walking around looking for, I don't have nothing, nothing. There's no bars. And the funny thing is, you can see a cell tower. Anybody remember been before? You can see a cell tower on the other mountain away, and for some reason it just doesn't help at all. I don't know, maybe it's a different phone company. But anyways, there's just very little, and we need that. We don't think we need that, but we do need that. We need to be disconnected sometimes. Sometimes we just need to unplug. We need to put our phones aside. We need to put our social media aside. And I'm all about social media. Somebody was saying to me earlier today, when my wife was saying, I shouldn't say somebody, it was my wife actually saying to me earlier today, she went on a girls' trip this weekend with some girlfriends, and so Luke and I were just kind of bacheloring around the house, and the house is a wreck and all that. But she said, one of her girlfriends that I've known for years, and she said, well, we know where Deron is all the time because he posted everywhere. He's like, I'm at the gym, or I'm here. I posted everywhere. So I'm all about social media. I get that. But listen, sometimes we need to be disconnected from that. We have to get away from some of the distractions, because if we don't, whether we realize it or not, we're not intentional. I get that. But we're conforming to the ways of the patterns of the world, little by little. And I'm not saying everything you do and all social media is evil. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying sometimes we have to do some pretty radical things to be disconnected for a while. Because only then can we really grow and hear from God. Listen, there's a couple of verses, and I've read these verses before. Mark chapter 1, verse 35 says, rising early, very, not just early, but how many of you are morning people? Maybe 4 in the room. I'm really not so much either. I'm more of a night owl. But Jesus was obviously a morning person. And he says rising very early in the morning while it was still dark. How many have been up before dark or before sunrise lately? Yeah? A couple of? Brady, you have? That's because you didn't go to sleep the whole night, right? Oh, okay. So he says, while it was still dark, he, Jesus, departed and went out to a desolate place. You know what desolate means? Remote. Nobody's around. I mean, it's like in the middle of nowhere. To a desolate place, and there he prayed. Jesus saw the need to get away from everybody else. And listen, there was no social media, right? There was no cell phones back in those days. But Jesus had a crowd of people always around him. He knew he had to get away from time to time. And one translation says this was something that he regularly did. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that was every day, every morning. I don't know. But it was something that was part of his regular routine. He got away from everybody else, went to a desolate place. And by the way, camp is where we're going is not a desolate place, okay? It's a beautiful place. It's up in the mountains. It's gorgeous. But he got away to these remote places where there were no cell phone service, and he spent time with God, with his Father. There's another place in Mark chapter 6, verse 31. And he, Jesus, said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. He's saying, look, all of us from time to time, we have all of these people, or you're inundated with all of the things of the world. And not always bad things, okay? It's not all bad stuff. I get that. But you're inundated. You're surrounded by it. Sometimes we have to just get away. Unplug, get away to a desolate place, to a remote place. Camp can be that type of catalyst in our lives. It can get us away from the distractions of life. Will there still be distractions at camp? Sure. There's still going to be distractions. Girls, guess what? There's going to be some boys there. And they're going to be hot or whatever. I don't know, whatever this lingo is. I don't know, whatever you use. And guys, there's going to be some good-looking girls. You know, there's going to be distractions, okay? That's just part of it. There's going to be distractions. But there's going to be fewer than there were if you were here. And it's what you choose. It's how you make that. Who is that? Beautiful. I like the ringtone though. So there's still going to be distractions, but you can choose how to deal with those distractions. Okay? We get away because we get distractions. We get away from distractions in our life. Secondly, see where he says the renewal of your mind. He says in verse 2, do not be conformed by this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Secondly, camp places us in a position to focus on God more. It focuses us on God. We get away from the distractions of the world somewhat, and we are able to focus more on God. Why? Because in the morning you wake up and you have a quiet time. Then you go to, well, let me just read. Let me just see what you do. Here's somewhat what the schedule is going to look like. In the morning, you wake up, you have a quiet time. Then you go to breakfast, and you go to roll call with his team time. You have your team time or your track time with your family group. Then you have some free time in the afternoon. Then in the evening after dinner, then we go to worship. So there's celebration in the morning, there's quiet time, celebration in the morning, there's family group time in the afternoon, and then there's worship in the evening. And after that, then we go spend time, church group time, where we reflect on the day that happened, what has happened today. And listen, that's some of the most precious time that we have, that church group time. It's where you get to share about what has happened today. What are things that are going on that God is revealing to you today? So not only does getting away from distraction, it also helps place us in a position where we can focus on God and more on Him than anything else. There's no TVs. Just want to prepare you if you haven't been before. No TVs up there. I'm a TV addict at times. I get that. I watch TV too much. I don't miss it when I'm at camp. I really don't. And I watch it a lot. I don't miss it at camp. Because it allows me, camp just allows me to focus more on God. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 2 says this, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So it helps us to look to Jesus, to focus on Him. We get away from some of the distractions. We get away from some of the things of the world. We get away from some of the things that are going on in our lives. And we get to focus more on Him. We get to spend more time with Jesus. And some of that is we are kind of forced to do that, but it's in a good way. Listen, sometimes we have to make ourselves do certain things so that we can spend more time with God. And it's okay. Sometimes we have to do some things that other people may look at and think, well, that's kind of weird. I don't want to do that. Sometimes we have to make those decisions to spend time with God. We have to do some drastic things. So, some people would think going away to camp, that's, summer camp. Why would you want to do that? You're getting rid of all your fun. You're not getting to hang. Guess what? They may not understand it, and that's okay. Because you're going to grow in your faith if you allow God to move in your life. He will. He will speak to you. I promise you that. He will speak to you. And I'm not saying that because I'm a prophet, and I'm not. I'm not anywhere near that. I just know from my experience in 20 years of doing camps, God will speak at camp. I promise you. The people up at Global, they've been praying about it for months, since last year. They've been praying about it. God will speak. You just got to listen. You can ask anybody that has gone before. Some years are better than others. Some years are greater than others. We hear more God more clearly on some years than we do on other years. I get that. That's just part of it. But God always speaks at camp, and I think partly because we focus on Him more, and we don't have the distractions that we normally have to deal with. And here's the last thing. In the last part of chapter 12, verse 2, he says that you be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by the testing you've been discerned what the will of God is. Number 3, not only does it get us away from distractions and places us in the position to focus on God, it allows us to hear from God more clearly. We can hear from Him more clearly when we are away from all the distractions. When we are focused on Him, we hear from God more clearly. I've said before, sometimes, I don't know how you do if you have a quiet time, which I highly recommend, obviously, that you have one. I don't have, mine's not always consistent like it should be, but, if you have a quiet time, probably not the best idea for you to have your computer on and your iPod or whatever on, Pandora on, or whatever, it may not be the best thing for that, to hear from God. Now, some of us, we like a little background noise, right? When I'm really spending some time focusing on God, this is kind of weird, so don't. I still have my man card, so just deal with that. But I like to have a candle burning, okay? But it has to be a wood wick because I like the sound of a wood wick candle. Okay, don't laugh at me. Okay, I'm still a man. I'm still a guy. But I have a candle. Sometimes I used to have a little fountain that I had flowing. and it until the motor burned up, and then I had to get rid of that. But so I like hearing like water, sometimes. It just kind of, I don't know, it just kind of puts me in kind of a mood where I can feel like I can hear more from God. I don't know. It just, all of us have our own preferences, right? We all have our own, like our special place. You got to have your special place where you can hear from God. There's going to be some special places on top of that mountain where we're going to go to that you're going to find will be your special place where you can hear from God more clearly. And that's okay. As long as it's not like out in the middle of the woods where nobody knows where you are. You can't do that, okay? There are some parameters, all right? There are bears in the mountains. Just trust me on that. But you'll hear from God more clearly because he'll speak to you more clearly in those moments, okay? Listen to what Jesus says. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. When we hear a word from God, we will be more inclined to follow him. But we won't hear him if with all the distractions in our lives. We won't hear him if everything is just, we're inundated with things of the world. We have to get away from that. You can ask anybody that's been before. And some of them would say, I wasn't really looking forward to going. But I guarantee you most of them would say by the end of the week, they would say, I'm so glad I went. Even the ones that didn't really want to go, they kind of felt like they were kind of pushed in going or forced to go. They would say at the end of the week, I'm so glad I went. Not because this camp is the best camp since sliced bread. It's not the best camp ever out there. But it's just one of those situations, an opportunity for us, for you, to get away from some areas where you're comfortable and get alone with God. Let me read you one last passage and then we're done. 1 Kings chapter 19. I'm going way back in the Old Testament on you here. Verses 11 through 13. Here's what the Word of God says. Let me find verse 11 first. I can see 12, but I don't see 11. So here it is. And he said, I'll go up here. Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passed by. Now you know this story probably as this is where God spoke to Elijah not to be consumed with, confused with Elisha, which was Elijah's predecessor. This was Elijah, who was a predecessor to Elisha. Kind of confusing, I know, but here's what he says. And he says, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passed by. The Lord passed by. That's an amazing phrase to me. And a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. So here this strong, mighty wind passes by and makes all this noise and destruction, but God wasn't in the wind. And the Lord and God, and then after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. But I mean, that'd be pretty noisy and pretty loud, right? But God wasn't in that. And after the earthquake, a fire came, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak, which was his coat that he would wear, and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? In other words, there's a whole backstory that we haven't talked about. That Elijah was kind of on the run for his life. He was running from a woman, which that's a whole different story. But he was running for his life. And God comes and through, and we think sometimes that God is going to make these huge, great, mighty just appearances, and sometimes he does. But God wasn't in the wind that shook everything. He wasn't in the earthquake that shook everything. He wasn't in any of that. He was in the still small whisper, the little breeze that came by. Now, why do I read that as we finish? Because sometimes it just takes getting away from all of the distractions in the world. Because sometimes God is just going to whisper to us. And I'm not saying like whisper in an audible voice. I don't know. He can. He's God. He can do whatever he wants. Personally, God hasn't spoken audibly to me before. But he has spoken to me in other ways. And sometimes they're so subtle, we will miss those opportunities if we don't get away from some of the distractions in our lives. When I was 19 years old, 19 or 20, my first time I'd ever gone to camp. I'd never been to camp as a teenager, in high school, middle school, high school. I don't even know if our church went to camp. I went to a small church. I can't tell you that we even went to camp. We may have. I don't know. But I was busy playing some, baseball usually, I guess. But I was home for the summer from college, and I had nothing better to do, I guess. And the pastor from the church that I grew up in called me and said, "Hey, I'm taking a few boys to camp, and I wanted to see if you want to go with me. I need you to go with me as a chaperone." For some strange reason, I said yes. I don't know why I said yes. I didn't really want to go. And we got on the bus before it broke down. And it did break down, by the way. But we got on the bus, and I'm thinking, and there were some rough kids that went. It was my church was kind of in an inner city part of Cincinnati, and so I didn't know any of the kids that were going, and I was not mature in my faith at all. I did have a relationship with Christ, but it was not a growing relationship, not until that week. And we get to camp, and you think it's rustic at Global. It's nothing like the camp we went to. It was pretty rustic, and I was miserable. I was home. I mean, here I was, 20 years old, 19, 20 years old, and the first night I wanted to come home. I was crying. I wasn't crying, but I still have my man card. I wasn't crying, but I wanted to come home. I was miserable. I was homesick, and I thought, what am I doing here? I don't even want to be here. And by the end of the week, it was the most amazing week of my life. And I knew that week, God began to call. Now, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but God began to call me into ministry just that week. And I didn't even want to be there. I had no desire. I guess I just didn't have a good enough excuse to say no. And I just didn't say no very well back then. So I went. And by the end of the week, I loved it. And I went back 2 more times as a chaperone with him because I loved it. And that's where God began to call in my life. So that's why camp is so important to me. Not because I think God's going to call all of you the same calling he has on me. That's not the point. He's not. But he does have something specific and unique to say to each and every one of us. I do believe that. And can he say that in other places other than at camp, at Global, up on the mountains? Absolutely. It doesn't have to be there. It can be anywhere. But there's just something about being away from home, being away from all your things that make you comfortable, and being away from all the distractions that you have on a daily basis, and being away at camp. There's something special about that. I can't explain it. I don't really know what all of it is, other than it just gets us away from distractions. It helps us focus on God, and it helps us to hear him more clearly. And I'm telling you guys, from somebody who's done it longer than most of you have been alive, it really works. So I hope that you're going to have a great week. I pray that you do. If you haven't decided yet, I hope you have decided by now you're going to go to camp. We'll make room. If we don't have enough, we'll make room. We'll tie you to the top of the bus or something, whatever. I don't know. But we'll get you there, okay? We would love for you to go. I'm just kidding. We're not going to tie you up to the top of the bus, all right? But we'll get you there, all right? Okay, let me pray for you, and then we'll move into our meeting in just about 5.
run dry. Sing it out. And it's an open heaven you're releasing, and we will never be denied. Cause we're stirring up. Cause we're stirring up deep, deep wells. We're stirring up deep, deep waters. We're gonna dance in the river. Dance in the river. Cause we're stirring up deep, deep wells. We're stirring up deep, deep waters. We're gonna jump in the river. Jump in the river. And deep cries out, deep cries out, deep cries out, deep cries out, deep. We cry out to you, Jesus. And I've got a river of living water, a fountain that never will run dry. No, now it's an open heaven you're releasing, and we will never be denied. Cause we're stirring up. Cause we're stirring up deep, deep wells. We're stirring up deep, deep waters. We're gonna dance.